Welcome to this edition of TiE University's Ask Me Anything. Tonight we have Eric Ensor. Eric is a charter member and board member with TiE in Atlanta. We also have Paul Lopez, who's co-chair of TiE Global. He is also a charter member with TiE Atlanta and a board member there as well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the only correction is I'm not the co-chair of TiE Global, just the global co-chair of TiE University.
Thank you for that. Very good.
They don't pay me enough to take on all the
hats. Well, you take on quite a bit, Paul. And so this is an opportunity to have an Ask Me Anything for the TiE University. So people can always go to tieuniversity.org and view these videos and sign up to watch future editions as well. But tonight, Eric, welcome. I know you've been in the wireless industry for many years, so welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. As we have chatted briefly, I really, like engaging with the university students and everything else in this part of the TiE ecosystem. It's really a fun and interesting adventure for me.
Very good. Very good, yes. And, Paul's been engaging extensively for a long time as well. And one of the things is, trying to understand a little bit of where you're coming from, Eric. Maybe you could just give us a quick background on, kind of how you got in the entrepreneurial world and a bit about your journey.
Sure. I've spent most of my career in wireless communications, wireless technology, and I'm sort of the classic mid-career crossover. I spent the first half of my career with large companies, Motorola, Bell South, things like that. And then in the late 90s, decided it was time for me to go out and do things more entrepreneurially. And so I left the big company environment and headed out to do a number of startups. Some worked out just fine. Others were not so well developed, as we would say, right? But it's really, I like the environment because you feel like you can at least have some control over your own destiny.
Well, I think you brought up a really key point about entrepreneurship is that, you read about some spectacular successes or people where everything goes right in the career, but for most of humanity, it's entrepreneurship's an up and down journey. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do. And, I think for young entrepreneurs, you've got to keep in mind that the things you read most about are the 10 companies that kind of knocked it out of the park, right? And there's everybody hopes that can be them, but the odds are not with you to do that. But you can do very, very well. But you've got to be willing to sort of work the issues and learn, and sometimes take a setback and then move forward from there. And I think it's not that entrepreneurial success is less work or easier than a full-time job with a big company. In fact, in a lot of ways, it may be even more difficult, but there's a chance for, I think, a lot more psychic reward and in a lot of cases, a lot more economic reward.
Is that, Paul, is that your experience as well?
No, I think you sort of take out of life whatever you want. A lot of people sort of wait and see, you can be happy working for other people. I was, like Eric, worked for 28 years for large companies like IBM and Xerox and banks and so on. And then the last couple, oh my God, a long time, I've gotten into the entrepreneurship area. I'd say that, I've heard a great saying that says, bloom where you're planted. And if you do, you'll be successful. Right?
Good perspective. I like that. Well, Paul, maybe you can, or sorry, Eric, maybe you can tell us about one of your successes, one of your not so successful.
Well, my first true startup was a venture funded company that raised $30 billion roughly in venture money. And it was a wireless technology sort of service play, if you will. And we launched in the late 90s and things were coming along nicely. And then the dot-com sort of meltdown of 2001, 2002 happened. And we were just at the point where we were going to go raise the significant deployment money, 80 to 100 million, that we needed to get the business off the ground. All that dried up. And so we had to lay off a bunch of folks, which is probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my career. And we tried to reboot, but we just couldn't stop sliding down the slope. So after a year and a half of additional struggle, we finally shut down. So it was fairly an unhappy time, right? Personally, for the people I'd hired, for the investors, they obviously were not all that thrilled. I mean, they were gracious given the circumstances, but I just lost $30 million of their money. It's hard for them to get over it. So that was one that was unfortunate, but I tried to take some takeaways from it. Some of the things that I did as just out of a big company kind of CEO, and try to figure out what was good and what wasn't good about the way we made decisions, or the way we, for example, it was $750,000. It started before I got there, but we spent $750,000 on market research. Well, hard to really justify. I mean, and this was the environment of the time, right? It was sort of the go late 90s, but in retrospect, who would ever think about spending $750,000 on market research before you have the first dollar of revenue, right? I mean, you may eventually spend it. So anyway, so there were things that I learned. I hired people too quickly on the premise that we were definitely going to raise the money, so we needed to be ready to go. Wouldn't do that again. So, I had some takeaways from it all that helped me later on as sort of rebooted and got restarted. But in the end, it's interesting because, particularly somebody of my sort of generation, if you will, my age group and all that, we kind of grew up thinking that you ought to work for a company for a large part of your career, or maybe a couple of big companies or whatever, when when we had to shut it down, for me, the biggest issue was not, okay, have to pay the bills and all those kind of very practical things, right? But I found that I lost an ability to keep score, right? Kind of how you did things. Did you please the CEO of the big company? Did you get your bonuses and stuff? So for about a year and a half, I struggled with, how do I keep score on myself, right? I was still the same person with the same experiences, but I'd lost my scorecard. And I thought that was an interesting reaction, which I didn't anticipate. Yeah. That said, so recovered from that and off we went. And I guess biggest success, a colleague of mine and I, sorry?
You've brought up several interesting points, and before we kind of move on, if
sure,
for interrupting, but so I think I heard like 3 points that I thought were noteworthy. One was how many people you hired, the size of the team. Then the next was how much research to do, and then the third was about how to kind of internally keep your own scorecard.
Right.
The good kind of summary there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Again, particularly if you're coming out of a larger company environment where you're used to certain ways to kind of think about those things, and you're now having to make those decisions without the support systems that a big company provides in certain ways, right? And you have to figure out how to deal with those kinds of things. And frankly, as an entrepreneur, I believe you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself, right? I mean, otherwise, who would do this, right? It can be a hard slog, but that the flip side of having all that confidence is that you don't really think that you might not succeed, right? Most entrepreneurs I know, go into whatever they're going to do without a lot of thought about plan B, right? Because you figure you're going to succeed and off you're going to go, and it may blow the doors off or it may just be a bit successful, but you're not going to just nose into the ground, right? So figuring out as you sort of feel the floor falling out, what the plan B is from a personal standpoint, or as importantly for me, helping all the people I'd hired away from jobs, things, to come work with me and support our ideas, how to help them with their plan B. I mean, that was to me the heaviest burden of all.
I can understand that. I've had a couple ups and downs myself. On the other points, I think your insight would be, might be very helpful to a student to say, how, given all your experience, what you've been through at this point, how would you think about things like how much research to do ahead? How much do I invest in research? How would you think about that?
Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, the timing and the times are so much different now, 20 years later, right? One is the sense that, the whole idea of rapid prototyping or, quick fail, whatever you want to call it, right, is much more in vogue and part of the landscape for entrepreneurs today than it was back in the late 90s, right? So I think the try it and see if they like it, and if they don't, try something, pivot a bit and do something else, everything else, is a healthy way that the ecosystem has evolved over the last 20 years, right? So I think that's part of it. And then the other thing is that with the robustness of the internet and all the data that one can find, you can do a lot of research. It may not be primary research, but there's a lot of data, a lot of things you can assimilate and evaluate, to sort of do a poor man's work of, sort of thinking about forecasting or product fit or things than you could 20 years ago. And I think you see, in the way that startups evolve in a lot of cases now, particularly startups that aren't heavily capital intensive, right? You can see this fast fail, fall forward kind of approach to things. And as long as you're got a thick enough skin to battle through that, then you can come out the other side with hopefully a better idea and a better plan.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I guess a similar type of approach for hiring would make sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think I think that, and again, in that, the, sort of the contracted worker, if you will, right? The part-time IT guy and all those kind of things. Again, those things are a lot more common now than they were. So you can buy partial resources and things until you get the right momentum and you can figure out kind of where the revenue may be coming from, right? So I think, again, if you're careful and thoughtful about it and know that you need to be controlling those kind of expenses, and it's very easy to say, well, you should have known that back then, right? But you've got a business that looks like it's going to lift off. you've got investors who want to go, go, go. And so there's this, and as a non-experienced sort of entrepreneurial CEO, I didn't see the warning signs early enough. And there weren't any accelerators or things much back then to try to, suggest things like, figure out those warning signs.
Right. There was no TiE University to draw upon at that point, huh?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. Or things like that. There were just not that many entrepreneurial types out there, maybe on the West Coast, but all this activity for me was in Atlanta, and there was a limited amount of venture money. There was a limited amount of people that had experienced sort of that startup environment, and so there weren't the support systems that I think are available. So one of the things I really believe is that for university and soon out of university students, taking advantage of those support systems, of the people that have sort of done things, have tried things, have experienced the networking piece of it that Paul talks about regularly is, I think, really important in how you succeed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's like you say, the internet's got so many resources. There's the network, the support systems are a resource people should take advantage of as well. So that's what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Yeah. So other thoughts, so we've got university students, college students, and presumably some of them are thinking about starting up their venture. Any thoughts on, team, co-founders, research, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as best as you can as a early stage entrepreneur, you ought to put together a team that has complementary skills, right? If you happen to be a very technical, let's say, programming kind of person, don't hire somebody else that looks like you, right? Hire somebody else that has a sales or business development background, or team up with people. So try to get a broad spectrum as you can in your founder or close to founder group, so that you bring as many perspectives to the, kind of puzzle as you can. I think that's important. And then the other thing I think is very important is, whether it's through a networking group like TiE or something else, identify somebody or bodies who can be your confidant and support system, right? I mean, if you have a significant other, they're going to get tired of all this sooner or later when you come home for the 98th day in a row and sort of say, oh my goodness, kind of thing, right? Your accountant, your lawyer, they all have vital skills, but they have sort of a piece of the vision and the business, right? Your co-founders, you might be able to, depending on kind of what kind of level you are and what kind of they are in terms of experience, right? But in the end, I've found that you need to make sure you can have somebody that you can go to, say, can I buy you lunch? And basically let your guard down and say, everything seems to be going to hell. Now what? You can't do that with all those other folks, right? Nobody on your staff wants to hear you're gonna have trouble making payroll, right? So you got to find, in my view, somebody you can just have that, oh my, the sky is falling, now what do I do kind of conversation with, who, if they know you well enough, will be able to find the right ways to sort of help you pick yourself back up.
Yeah, I regularly hear, that kind of startup and entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. You know, 1 minute you're thrilled and everything couldn't, just couldn't be better. And then 15 minutes later, oh my gosh, the world's collapsed. Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah, yeah, you think you think you've got the deal, right? That's gonna, you know, I mean, at the end of the first company that ended up finally shutting down, we thought we had a big deal with one of the big U.S. tower companies, which was going to kind of save our skins, if you will, and get us to relaunch and go raise some more money and stuff. And it came down to us and one other group, and for a couple of reasons, um, the tower company went the other way. And and so you're one day we're feeling great about it, and the next day it's like, oh, now that's not good news, kind of thing. What do you do about that? So I think those are, you just got to be used to those things, and you try to keep an even keel, but you also don't want to risk not getting excited about the things that are really good that happen, right? Everybody needs a bit of positive reinforcement along this journey. So you just got to find that when you can find it.
Mhm. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, speaking of positive, maybe you can share a little bit about, one or two of your successes.
Sure. I mean, I think that I had a business partner who I'd known, but back in our Bell South days, but we identified opportunities in the wireless tower business, first in Central America and after that in Latin America. And we actually formed a joint venture with one of the big US based tower builders and renters of space for the wireless carriers. And we launched a business that we grew to 1,700 towers in Central America. And then we had a structure of a deal in place that allowed us to sell out to them for a tidy profit. So that one worked very well. It was 3.5 years of hard work and struggle and good news some days and bad news the others and all that. But in the end, we kept sort of climbing the hill, if you will. And so that one ended up very well. And we sort of built on that with a follow-on tower business in South America, particularly Colombia and Peru. And the business grew nicely. It didn't grow quite as rapidly as we had hoped, but in the end, we had another exit at the end of 2017 that ended up being very favorable, for both our investors and ourselves, and it was, a similar kind of, one step, one foot in front of the other, and it wasn't a sort of sexy technology business. It ends up in the end being kind of a real estate play, if you will, right? But again, I think we had learned a lot from our previous adventure in that, and then my partner's wireless experience before that, and we just sort of built on what we thought we knew and just try to do a better job and and get another business built. And we exited that in the end of 2017 and successful fashion. And and sort of since then I have been looking at early stage things. As we mentioned, I spent a lot of time with some of the TiE programs. I've invested in an Internet of Things company and worked with them for a bit to help them get launched. And I'm at the stage of my career now where sort of doing interesting things that can be fun are sort of my priority now, as opposed to just doing it because I need to make some money to pay the bills. It's a nice place to be in at this point.
That's great. That's great. Reward for a lot of hard work there, I'm sure. So yeah. Well, Paul's been exhibiting one of the characteristics that I particularly think is important, and that's listening. And so, Paul, you've any thoughts or comments or questions at this point?
Oh, I'm going to actually, I think when you were asking about the downside of entrepreneurship, and Eric gave a couple of great examples with what happens now when you don't win the bid out of the two companies, et cetera. I'll tell you a favorite word I've learned in the last year or so that I think every entrepreneur should not only learn, but also practice. And here's the word. It's not really a word, but I think it's a great concept, and that is become a solutionist. If you can become a solutionist, you will find a path. It's really another way of saying take action over what it's again, over what you can control. And so out of that, instead of moping or whatever, I think the very best entrepreneurs, you could say they exhibit persistence, et cetera, great quality. But if you can be a solutionist, no matter what situation you're in, you're going to be happy, and you're going to do great things, and you're going to be successful. Right? So that's the one thought as I was listening to some of Eric's storytelling, right, in that regard. And we go to a lot of meetings in which people love to spend a lot of time around the problem. And with people who work for me or people around me, I always say, if you bring a problem, that means you've at least thought about it 10 minutes longer than I have. What is the solution? And I think if we all can just do that as entrepreneurs, as co-founders, I think we'll build great things. So just one concept out of listening to all of that. I told you it's one of those so what's, right? What did we take out of this time together? But just an idea.
Yeah. No, I think that to me, that's excellent advice. If I was a college student, there'd be, am I comfortable finding solutions? Yeah.
Yeah, and whether it's, look, you may be in a city in which the ecosystem's not built out. So, you can go worry about the 20% of the glass that's not full, or you can, think about the 80 that is. Or look, I can't raise funds. And frankly, I as a venture capitalist, I'm the odd person to say, why are you giving away parts of your company? Why aren't you bootstrapping? Why aren't you focused on the real best way to raise funds? You know who to raise funds from? The very best.
Very
not
best.
From banks, not from VCs, not from companies like me. The best places to raise funds are from customers. It's called revenue. And I think we don't talk about raising revenue as much as we talk about fundraising. And I think again, just another way of thinking that whether you're a startup, whether you've been at it a couple of years, can you raise revenue? If entrepreneurs, again, would just focus on that. Again, I bet they'll be much more successful.
Excellent advice. Erica, I assume you echo those thoughts?
I do. I love Paul's term of solutionist, right? I mean, it really is, because, it's nobody else is going to help you solve these problems. You need to do it yourself. That's the whole idea of being an entrepreneur. So I love the concept, and I think it would have helped me in a couple of my earlier adventures as I was trying to learn to be an entrepreneur. If I just thought about it like that. So I like that. And then, there is no doubt that if you can raise revenue, you have to raise less capital. And that means you keep more of your business, and everything else, follows through and all that. And frankly, if you raise your revenue levels, raising the money gets easier, right? Because revenue metrics are a huge part of what venture people, equity players look at, right? They're in the early going, it's, am I investing in a valuable team? And can you really show me some kind of revenue traction? And the rest of it just kind of falls into place, in my opinion, most of the time.
One other thought I had as I was listening to Eric, and as I'm thinking of some listeners here, We think, okay, I'm a product person, I'm a technical founder, I'm a whatever it is. So let me go find a biz dev guy because we just talk about revenue, or let me go find somebody who understands the market or the domain, et cetera. The one area now I've learned as a VC that I think we underestimate is who's got the financial acumen. It is an area that people tend to think of, too late. So one of the other ideas I want to just plant here is think about it early. Think about who's got the financial acumen that gets us every day to think about not just revenue, but profitable revenue, or how to minimize fixed cost and therefore drive even your costs are more variable. So your burn rate is more. That's the kind of stuff that I think in general, our founders need to find somebody, whether it be I think you said a moment ago, Eric, fractional CFO, whether it's finding somebody who's willing to take shares in your company and help you think about it. Because if you can get that financial picture down, it's as important. It's no less important than having the right product for the right market, et cetera. It's an area that I would just say, no matter how many founders you've got, one of you has to exhibit and operationalize the financial acumen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And if I think about over the last 6 or 7 years, the hundreds of university teams we have seen and go through, almost, I would say at least 80% of those teams, the financial understanding, acumen, thinking is the weakest part. And so we tell our coaches when we start our sort of process every year that the one thing they really need to focus on is helping the teams get better at all of that, right? And it's because, as Paul said, it's just so important to get the baseline of that set up so you can build your business and you don't let financial issues get in the way of your ability to scale.
Right. Right. I think I'm hearing several things where there's a really interesting balance, if you will, in here. One of the things that I think I heard was you need to be a solutionist, which I completely agree with. But I also heard, you need to, use your resources, advisors and experts. And so, I think being a solutionist is fantastic, but that doesn't preclude you from seeking advice, whether it's, from your VC or your professional service providers or mentors or wherever in the ecosystem you get it from. Does that ring as a, particularly useful thing for a college student who's looking at this type of adventure?
Let me go first on this one. I just want to say that I think a lot of students think about and talk about needing a mentor. I just mirror that thought process. Think of yourself as a mentee. And what are you looking for? What are you looking for from a person, as opposed to, I got to go find a mentor? No, what are the 2-3 things I need to be thinking about? And then who is the right mentor and how do I make sure I position it? Here's the other part is I will tell you, having lived on 3 continents, the one part I love about America is people are here to help you. I think for people who haven't lived on other continents, I can tell you one of the cultural aspects we have in America is we love helping others. You know why? Because we're not giving away anything. When you give away thought and you give away leadership, et cetera, you really haven't given away anything, right? I've not diminished mine. And I will tell you, it's because people don't think through what is it that I'm asking for. And then at some time, ask the other question, what can I do to help others? I think you'll get to that place even as a student because you're obviously still in that skill building sense, but at some point you're going to get to where you can help others. But I would just say, think of what is it that you're looking for help, and you will find the right person, and then and people will give it to you in spades. I will tell you that's one of the best parts of TiE. I learn from people every day, despite having been 40 years in business. And so I tell students, whether you're 18 or 20 or 30 years old, it doesn't really matter. I think be a sponge and then go do something with it. So I haven't found a lot of people who say, I'm not here to help you. It's like, I don't think that's the American way, really. So I'm so pleased that we live in a culture where people are really ready to help, but you need to know what you're looking for to make it easy for them.
That's fantastic. That's very insightful. One of the reasons I like doing these interviews is because I do learn so much. So, I think that's related to what you're saying there. Eric, how about, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, and then I will tell you, one of the things Eric has done at our chapter, but really it's available at any chapter of TiE. Eric, we actually call our mentors coaches, I think partly because here in the South, we're very sports minded, but I think just about anybody could probably project that. And Eric, don't you think that the coaches come back year after year because they love working with the students? Our retention rate is fabulous. We don't pay them anything. All they say is, have some stick-to-itiveness. If you're going to do a call with me, on next Wednesday, show up on time, be ready, etc. But I think Eric is going to tell you that the coaches are waiting for these students to be sponges and help them. Isn't that what you've learned over the years, Eric?
Absolutely. I mean, we have, as Paul said, we have a very high return rate for our coaches. Most of the ones that we lose are because they've moved or they've, got a new job and they're traveling too much, but we have a very high retention rate. There's some of the coaches that I think we've had the whole 7 years that I've been working with Paul on this, right? I try to suggest to the teams as we start our process every year is that the only way you won't get help from your coaches is if you choose not to engage, right? The coaches are not going to, force engagement, So as long as you as a young entrepreneur engage or interactive, all of our coaches will spend more time, more hours, and we quote unquote ask of them in kind of our recruiting perspectives, right? I've never heard of a coach turn a team down for another 2 hours of advice as long as they feel like they're, and it's not just that they agree with the coach, it's that they're just engaging with the coach, right? And I think that's a very important lesson because, even if you're not on a student team, once you go out and start your own business or whatever you end up doing, people react to engagement and, responsibility. And I don't think you can underestimate in human nature how, that is a very positive way to approach sort of your new business venture, whatever that may be.
Sorry, I just thought of a concept, Eric, and first I'll lay it out for the listener here. I think we ought to tell all our student entrepreneurs who are assigned to mentors or whatever, if it's going to be an ongoing mentoring kind of relationship, not just a one-time, I'm here with a panel or whatever. Those are also useful, but ones where it's going to be for the next several weeks or whatever. The student entrepreneur ought to have a single-page rules of engagement. It's kind of interesting. We have it for so many other relationships in employment, and I join a team for the summer, but we don't do it in mentoring. And I'm thinking that maybe a takeaway, and we ought to create one here, I think, Eric, for the program.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The very first meeting is a one-page. We're not going to give you a whole lot of rules, but you write it down. You and the mentor, or you and the coach, write down the rules of engagement, whatever you think they ought to be, and then both follow it, right? Or update it occasionally, come back and say, did it happen that way? I think, to me, again, I'm just going to, again, leave a concept there that says, if I'm there as a college entrepreneur, et cetera, and I've been given the gift of a mentor, wouldn't that be a great way to start? So,
yeah, I think that's a really good point. The other thing that's interesting is that we have now that we've done this for several years, we have a number of teams that continue on after our competition. And a lot of times we have some of the coaches that we've assigned for our competition that stay with the team. We have one team that's 3 years out now, raised its first round of funding, and one of their original coaches is still supporting them, right? So there are opportunities to make this it doesn't have to end with the end of our competition and all that. So you can create relationships that could last for a good long time and go well beyond the scope of the original sort of coaching assignment, if you will.
Mhm.
And that's the wonderful part of TiE. I really believe, especially when we think of our charter members, we tell them that, when they say, what's the ROI of being a charter member? Certainly here in our chapter, we say, actually, you're supposed to answer that. You're going to give back. So you tell us, in giving back, how much you're ready to give back and do that. Because we've all been privileged. We've gotten to a certain place in life, like Eric described. What are you going to do? And so what I'd say to the student entrepreneurs is, these charter members want to give back, make it easy on them.
Mhm. That's great. That's great insight and advice. I like the, any relationship, it's good to lay out some basic, guidelines for everybody to follow, expectations. So very excellent advice. Well, I think we're kind of coming up on a few minutes left here. Perhaps other takeaways or thoughts that have come to mind in the course of the discussion? Anything particularly, Eric or Paul, that you think could be useful for college students?
Well, it's probably one of those kind of hokey sounding kind of things, but really need to try to enjoy the journey. Right. I mean, you're doing it for a variety of reasons, but don't lose sight of the fact that it can be an incredibly invigorating and rewarding journey, whether it ends up being material wealth or just contacts or whatever it is. So, I hope that as people sort of go off in this entrepreneurial manner, that they work hard to enjoy the journey.
Excellent advice. Yeah.
I think the 2 pointers I'd leave with are, I love Nike's slogan, right? Just go do it. I think so many times we want to see all the inhibitors and all the reasons I can't do it, and my parents can't, and I won't, and really just go do it, right? And then I think the other one is, as Yoda says, don't try, just do, right? So I think it's connected, right? It's like, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs who want to get it all perfectly right. Just go do, execute, go be an operator. It's a great time to actually find out success or failure, learn from your failure. But I think when you're at that stage of life, you're more likely to actually try a lot. So we're wishing people well in that regard.
I think that's a great insight. The opportunity cost, it may feel like you're giving up, this great job opportunity from the corporate side. If you go start something when you're just coming out of college, but the opportunity from doing are so extraordinary.
Yeah. But you know what, Carl, today, as we work with a lot of students, et cetera, unlike perhaps in our generation, where unless your parents were entrepreneurs, you didn't think of entrepreneurship as being your career path, right? I went to work for IBM. Eric mentioned Motorola, Bell South, or whatever. That was the typical path, right? In our generation. Today, the good news is the student doesn't have to pick. The student can do both. They can go still work for Johnson & Johnson, get a lot of great training, or Merck or whoever, and then come back and be an entrepreneur, or be an entrepreneur on the weekend and evenings. So the nice part is there's choices, and it's not or, it's and. They can do both, or they can go start a small business of some kind, an e-commerce app or whatever, while working for a big business, and vice versa. So I think we're just sort of leaving the message of, take action.
Take action. that says
Yeah,
it
I
all.
think the only other thing I would say too is that, there are personality types, people, backgrounds, whatever, that are not particularly well suited to the entrepreneurial journey, right? Excuse me. And I think, it doesn't mean that you're not a good business person or a good manager or whatever. I mean, it's finding the right fit for your skill sets and your personality types and everything, whether it's on the corporate side or the entrepreneurial side. There's nothing wrong with either. It just, you got to find the way you fit into that system.
Excellent point as well. Excellent point. Yeah, a little self-examination to, judge where you're at the moment, and that can change over time as well.
Yeah, and go hang around. In today's world, most colleges have got these entrepreneurship cells, they've got incubators. Hang around the other kind of people you want to be with. It's more likely that you'll then go do something. You might, hey, find a co-founder. So we wish the listeners extremely well, and thanks for the questions that you've raised and got us to at least think about, right?
Try and stir it up a little bit here. Well, Carl Meyer, I'm a charter member and board member with TiE Houston. And I want to thank Eric and Paul for their insight tonight. And I know they're both committed to providing coaching and mentorship through the tieuniversity.org. How can the students get in touch with you?
Well, I think we're both on the TiE University community site. And so I think that's probably the easiest, most direct way. Sign up to the TiE University community website, and you can find us, both of us and many other folks there who are more than willing to have a conversation with you in some fashion about these kinds of things.
Yeah, two things I'd say. Number one is I'd echo what Eric said. So it's bit.ly/TiE community if you're listening to this on YouTube and have not already become a participant in our TiE community platform. Not only us, you actually find other mentors, people who may have domain expertise in healthcare or bio or what science or whatever. But for me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. It's an easy connector, etc. Especially, I always say yes to somebody who's a student. I just have this place, maybe because my mom, was an educator all of her life, etc. And I'm Lopez Paul. So it's LinkedIn, reverse my name and you'll find me. Or if you say Paul Lopez in Atlanta, you'll probably find me.
Yeah, mine's straightforward in that regard on LinkedIn too. So, yep, feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, thank you both. And if anybody would like to reach out to me, they can find me on the TiE University website and LinkedIn as well. So thank you all, and good
Thanks,
mentoring.
Carl. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.